So welcome to the first plasma meeting of the year. Today we're going to have John talking to us about deuterium, and then a little bit later on we'll talk about where we want this group to go and what we'd like to do during the year. So without further ado, ta-da!
Thank you.
John Hardgrave.
Thanks, Russell. So for those of you who are not members of the group and are just here for today, my name's John Hardgrave. I have a vibrational health business in Lismore. I've done a number of presentations, 2 last year, one on the electric nature of our body, and where I focused on some of the works of Jerry Tennant, and then I did another one on molecular hydrogen. There's a lot of proof around how molecular hydrogen helps our body, and it'll get a mention today because this presentation, depleted deuterium, is something that I discovered through my interest in molecular hydrogen, and having done an amount of research, I got quite excited about it. So it has the potential to be, significant to our health, whether there's something wrong with us or whether there's nothing wrong with us. And as we go through the presentation, I think you'll see that. So what's deuterium? Well, deuterium's a naturally occurring isotope of hydrogen. So hydrogen has got 1 proton and 1 electron, and deuterium has got an extra neutron, which makes its weight about twice as heavy. So everywhere you find hydrogen, we say the word hydrogen, but there's actually 3 stable isotopes of hydrogen. Protium, which is the common one and is the most. Deuterium, which occurs in about 155 out of every million molecules of hydrogen, and then radium, which has got 2 deuterium molecules, and we won't talk about it. It's radioactive, and it's largely only exists because it's a waste product of the nuclear industry. So we also call depleted deuterium water light water for obvious reasons. It weighs about 3 grams lighter than a normal litre of water. So that's because in a normal litre of water we have 3 grams of heavy water, which is the other name for deuterium. So as the slide says, deuterium is not a contaminant, but it plays a role in the biological process, and it also plays a role in the nuclear industry. So basically, because it has an extra neutron, that's an extra source of energy, so it's quite energetic. So you'll see later when we talk about depleted deuterium in relation to cancer, that cancer likes that extra energy. So if we live the way nature intended, outdoors without technology, then our bodies could regulate the amount of deuterium that we have in them naturally. So our bodies, the cells of our body, has ways of stopping, and I'll show you a little video later, the deuterium getting into the cell. But because most people spend 95% of their time indoors and under artificial light, my sister, for example, lives in Hong Kong, lives in high up in an apartment, lovely view over the water, then catches a bus to another commercial building where she works for the day. So unless she goes out of that building on purpose, and then she might be lucky to find a little bit of grass in a park nearby. Okay? In China, I don't know if any of you have seen the study that was done, or I think they ran it on 60 Minutes. Chinese children, 80-90% of them wear glasses at a very young age, and it's because they're not getting sunlight. Okay, because out of an apartment, into a school, no playgrounds, because the cities are so crowded. So they did an experiment. They made a school that had glass windows and glass ceilings to let the light in. And it changed that statistic very markedly. So sunlight's important. So I'm going to talk to you about depleted deuterium today, but I'll tell you that, you know, getting the morning sun before there's any UV, having a place where you live that's airy and has no mould, and it's away from EMF, are all really, really good things that you can do for your health. Turns out drinking depleted deuterium water, or allowing your body to have a deuterium level in the 130s, is another really good thing that you can do for your health. So what are some of the characteristics of deuterium? So normal water boils, as we know, at 100 degrees centigrade. Well, heavy water boils at 101.4. Normal water freezes at 0, heavy water freezes at 3.8. Ice normally floats on the surface of the water. Ice made with heavy water sinks. Bacteria and algae can handle 100% of heavy water, substituted for normal water. But heavy water at a level of 50% will kill us. And I was abhorred, or I don't know if abhorrence, whatever the verb is from abhorrence, but you know, there's people on the internet saying, drink heavy water for your health. Okay, it'll kill you, let me tell you. So don't, you know, you have to really research the stuff you see on the net. So we'll talk about how you make deuterium later and whether some of these characteristics make it easy or difficult to make. So in terms of your body and your cells, what are some of the characteristics? Well, it decreases your energy production, and that's all got to do with the mitochondria, and I'll elaborate on that. It decreases your ability to use energy because it takes energy. It deforms the three-dimensional structure of your proteins, fats and carbohydrates you eat and your body make. How does that work? Well, because a hydrogen, a heavy hydrogen molecule is different than a normal one. So, you know, if you've got a carbohydrate that has those sort of, they call it 2H with their little 2 up in the corner, it makes those very different. It doesn't allow your DNA to properly fold and replicate. So that's why, so all of the time in our body we're replacing cells. There's millions of cells being destroyed, and there's millions of cells being created. The lining of your guts is I think 3 days. Your liver's like 9 weeks. So with all of that creation and destruction, there's an opportunity as we age and our deuterium levels increase for that not to happen in the correct manner, right? Hence we age. Hence we get blemishes on our skin, which is the biggest organ and has lots of replication occurring. So at least we can see those when it occurs in organs and more important parts of our body. It can, you know, it's a bit more counterproductive. It changes the binding constants of your enzymatic reactions. It changes the pharmacological kinetics and dynamics of medicine, supplements and other therapies. It may ultimately control who you are and how you respond to clinical treatments. What does that mean? Well, I haven't got the map to show you, but there's a study being done on the US, and they have like the deuterium levels in the water in different places in the US, and they have the incidence of depression in all of those places. And they actually look very much like the same maps. Isn't that interesting? So talking about the deuterium content of drinking water, you can see here we've got probably a bit hard to see, but the pink ones are 100 and the blue ones 120. Sorry, put the glasses on, John. 100 to 120, and the pink ones 160 to 180. And the other, yeah. Can you read those? No. Okay, so the bright blue one is 100 to 120. The grey one's 121 to 140. The sort of off pink one is 141 to 160, and the pink one's 161 to 180.
Can you show us where the blue ones are, please?
Well, the blue ones are only in a couple of places. They're just here, there and there. And if I had Antarctica there, there'd probably be quite a lot of blue there. And we'll mention that. We'll mention that later.
What's the one in northern New South Wales?
The one in Australia there is the off pink one. That's 141 to 160. I'd suggest pretty much most places in Australia would be around 150, 155, which is, as you know from one of the first slides, the default average for the world. So what does it mean? Well, it means the level of deuterium in the food we eat, because the food gets its deuterium where from the water and from the nutrients. But we'll find that food that's rich in chlorophyll, so food that is green and above the ground, has less deuterium, right? So typically animals and plants, because they're not bombarded by the same sorts of things we are in cities, are still have a lesser amount of deuterium than the deuterium in the water around them. Does that make sense? Whereas we're largely got pretty much the same or more deuterium in us than the water that we would drink. So the deuterium level of seawater is about 155. Okay. Across the globe? Yeah, pretty much across the globe. I'm going to talk about ageing and old age and how deuterium affects that later, and so I won't go through that now, but there's some pretty noticeable occurrences of people that live in cold countries where they drink water from ice melt. So the melting and refreezing of water is a way to deplete it in deuterium. So there's people that live in those high climates and drink that water, and they often have got more healthy characteristics than us, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Less tech. So this is a bit more of the scientific slide, and we're calling it light water here. So you can see that from a scientific point of view, and all that transport properties in the cells, things like detoxification, radioprotective properties, antioxidant activity, and then the activation of receptor signaling systems. We'll talk about hyperglycemic properties, anti-tumour properties. So these are the sorts of things or processes in our body that are much better if you've got a lesser level of deuterium. So how do we get the deuterium in our body? Well, we get it from the two sources of water that we have. In other words, the water that you drink and the water that your mitochondria make from the food that you eat. So the water that comes from the mitochondria in the food that we eat is largely, if we're healthy and our cells are protecting themselves from getting the deuterium, they call it metabolic water, and there's lots of different names to the water in cells, but so the water we drink is not the water in our cells. We have to process the water into this state of a highly structured form, and as a consequence of the water we eat the water we drink, or the fluids that we drink and the food that we eat, we end up with some sort of deuterium content in our blood and tissues. And that's from that combination. And here's just I just liked it was a nice pretty side, but it basically says, it talks about the mitochondria and how the mitochondria are the thing that really gets affected by deuterium. So if you've heard me speak a couple of times now, you've heard me speak about mitochondria. What are they? They're these things that aren't us, that live in our cells, in the order of 400 to a couple of thousand in a particular cell, right? And so they have their own DNA. They're symbiotic to us. We could not exist without the mitochondria. The mitochondria could not exist without us. So they're not the only thing that are symbiotic to us. We have other microbiota that people have realised over the last number of years are important, except for all of those people that take lots of drugs, antibiotics that like to kill them, kill the micro. Anyway, let's not go there. So with the mitochondria, within each mitochondria, it runs a thing called the ATP cycle, and that takes largely hydrogen as a fuel and uses oxygen as the thing to burn it with, if you like, but in a little engine called a nanomotor. So each mitochondria has about 400 nanomotors. These nanomotors run at 9,000 revs, right? So, and I'll read this to you. Under modern living conditions, the deuterium can build up in your mitochondria over time and clog the energy generating ATPase nanomotors. Every 3.5 times your nanomotor spins, one molecule of ATP is made. Only hydrogen can spin the ATP's nanomotor. Deuterium cannot spin the nanomotor, and in many tissues it can actually destroy the nanomotor. As deuterium flows into the cell matrix, less ATP is made. The higher the levels of deuterium in your mitochondria, the less energy you produce, and the more likely you will develop a chronic disease. So you can see there 1,500 hydrogen ions are transferred per second in these nanomotors. And heavy deuterium isotopes break this delicate protein. I'm now going to play a video of how that actually works.
Take a journey together in the depth of our cells where energy is produced, called ATP. And let's look at the nanomotor that produces our energy, and so delicate that our body would do anything to protect this little protein nanomotor. Now we are traveling through one layer of membranes, which is the cellular membrane. And in the very depth of our cells, there are these mitochondria, which are little engines in our body using oxygen and hydrogen that comes from food to produce water. This is what we call metabolic water. And based on what we eat, the hydrogens and the protons that originate from this food source would actually help mitochondria to produce energy. Here we're going to go to a second layer of membranes to go into the mitochondrial matrix where ATP is produced from the food that we oxidize. And here we can see these spinning nanomotors at 9,000 rotations per minute, which is faster than a car engine. And the hydrogen and proton atoms are driving this spinning motion, and our deuterium depletion, which is the heavy isotope of hydrogen and these protons, have to be discriminated from this process because they break this little nanomotor, this very delicate protein. We can see by the spinning of the protein by protons, there's ATP synthesized by these additional proteins that are attached to this nanomotor. This is the static part, which generates electromagnetic and electrostatic force from the spinning protein, to deliver ATP to our cells. So healthy cells, normal cells, have to operate in a deuterium depleted environment to protect these nanomotors, because this deuterium heavy isotope of hydrogen is so heavy, twice as heavy as hydrogen, will actually imbalance this nanomotor. And here you can see again, as they attach to the side of this protein, 9 or 10 or 12 of them at any given time. And now we are closing the inner membrane of the mitochondria to protect the metabolic water to get out of the mitochondria and lubricate these nanomotors and provide hydrogens or protons, which are protecting these nanomotors to produce energy. Disease conditions develop when the hydrogen deuterium ratio is not optimal in these nanomotors. And this is what we are measuring in our clinic, how these nanomotors are working very precisely, looking at hydrogen deuterium ratios in various body fluids. Thank you for
I guess all I was trying to show you was, a pictorial look at what I was saying about the motors and the spinning and so forth. But when you think, like a Ferrari, its engine doesn't go 9,000 revs, does it? Who's into cars?
No, you're looking at a motor-like motor.
To get, yeah. So we've got 400 to a couple of thousand of these things in each and every cell, and within each one of those, it's got a protein that's essentially a little nanomotor that runs at 9,000 revs. It's pretty special, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
And it probably doesn't take a lot to break it. So I'm just going to go through a few things with regard to, we talked about the characteristics of depleting deuterium. So we're going to talk about how deuterium affects cancer cells. So cancer cells need carbs or sugar to grow, but what most people don't know, it's actually not actually the carbs themselves, but the deuterium on the carbs. So the metabolism of both normal and cancer cells use the hydrogen from the food we eat to make the energy using those tiny nanomotors from our mitochondria. But as we said, those motors are broken when they use deuterium rather than hydrogen as fuel. So normal cells become cancerous by switching to alternative metabolic pathways to make the energy they need. The problem is that cancer needs a lot more fuel because unlike normal cells, they're always growing, dividing and making more cancer cells. Having high levels of deuterium is like pouring gas into your cancer's fuel tank. So that's pretty stark stuff, isn't it? I mean, we all go, cancer loves sugar, but how many of us knew that the reason it loves sugar because there's more deuterium in sugar? So it makes you wonder about the levels of deuterium in different things, and we've talked about it in water, but it's also in food. So there's more deuterium in root vegetables than vegetables grown above the ground, because vegetables grown above the ground are open to the sunlight and the chlorophyll process, and that depletes things in deuterium. So we all know it's good to eat greens, but what if I tell you the reason that it's good to eat greens is as simple as it's depleted deuterium? See, what I love about this deuterium conversation is it simplifies stuff so much, and that's what I loved about the electric body. It simplifies it so much because it's so complex when we go to a medico and talk about it, isn't it, really? And we think we can't understand it. So I watched a really interesting interview by a guy that's into the depleted deuterium, and he was interviewing the man that you couldn't hear speak then, who's one of the experts. His name's Laszlo Borossis or something. He was a Hungarian, he lives in the States now. And the guy was talking about coconut water. And so he was saying that, he liked to, that was one of his little habits, he liked to drink coconut water. And Boris says, "Oh, you're no smarter than a monkey then, are you?" you know, with a laugh on his face. He wasn't being. And the guy was a bit taken back. He said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, if you watch monkeys, when they open the coconuts, they let the water run out and they eat the flesh. Would you like to know that the water's actually high in deuterium and the flesh is low in deuterium?" So I just found that funny and had to stop drinking my favourite coconut water. So, which is a bit...
All your favourite things will be knocked out.
So we talked about cancer and we talked about how it likes deuterium. So how can depleting the deuterium help? So there's a gentleman called Gabor Somalai or something who wrote this book in 2002, right? So, and the book's all about defeating cancer, but it's not like some magic bullet. What it's saying is that by having lower levels of deuterium in our body, cancer won't grow, or cancer doesn't get what it needs. It lessens the ability of cancer cells to make the energy they need to continually grow and divide, takes away the energy cancer needs to metastasize. So how does that physically work? So you'll see a little bit further on in the talk that I'll talk about how we can, the many ways we can deplete deuterium in our body. Some are just natural ways that we do normally, but then if we're in a situation where we've got cancer, we may need to accelerate that to get to that place more quickly. So the really interesting thing that he found, and he started doing his research in early in the 1990s. He's got double-blind studies that show that it extends the life of cancer patients. It helps some in the earlier stages get over cancer. It helps keep it at bay. Okay, so you'd think, well, how do you do that? So over here I've got some water that's 25 parts per million deuterium. So given that the stuff we're drinking is 155 parts, that's quite low. So you'd think you'd hit it with that, wouldn't you? Hit it with a big gun. Hit it with the lowest thing you could. But apparently that doesn't work so good. That shocks the cancer, but the cancer can recover. So what they found works well is you give the patient a lower level of deuterium than they're having at the moment. So you might start off at 105 parts per million. And you might do that and he's got a number of protocols in his book, depending if you've had cancer for a short time, a long time, or if you're healthy and you're just wanting to age gracefully and keep your health. So the protocols are all about the level of deuterium depleted water you take and the time that you take it for. Okay, so I've got a lady in Perth at the moment I was hoping would have her latest scan for the talk, but she doesn't get her scan till next week. So for several weeks now, she's been on the deuterium depleted water and on a protocol out of the book, and she's also been breathing molecular hydrogen regularly while she sleeps. So I'll give you an update at a later meeting about how she's gone. But why I'm talking about it is that everyone's feeling really positive because she started putting on weight again. She needs less pain medication and she's moving about a lot more. So what happens when you use this method of depleting deuterium over time is the cancer, the healthy cells handle it, but the cancer cells don't. So the healthy cells operate like normal and the cancer cells start to die back. So the cancer starts to shrink. Now, whether it goes away altogether or whether it doesn't, Gabor is not going to say it will or it won't, and I'm not going to say it will or it won't. I like to err on the side of caution with all of that sort of stuff because it's a fairly significant event in someone's life to have that. But the big thing is that it won't grow. You can stop it from growing, you can let it sort of go back, and if you've got, there are some cases where things are inoperable, so you can't even go down that path. So now the other thing is that in America, the other gentleman, Boris, who I talked about, they're working with a lot of doctors who use chemotherapy, and we'll all have a view on chemotherapy. But what Boris says is a lot of these doctors are now recommending the depleted deuterium water for all their chemotherapy patients. So it just shows me the doctors probably know the odds of how the chemo is going to work, and they're going to try and give them every opportunity. So the lady in Perth, she's on one lot of chemo, and her brothers and her daughter and I guess, didn't want to mess with that while she's on the depleted deuterium and the hydrogen. But what we're all hoping is when the scan comes back and it's much less, we don't care who gets the credit, but they'd like to then keep her on the natural methods for another month or two and do another scan, rather than do another whole round of the chemo. So, and fortunately for her, the doctor's on board, so that's good.
When you said it works by having less deuterium,
Yeah.
how does that work? You know, with homeopathy, you take it right down to it's a minuscule, less than a molecule. Is that the same direction, or is there something else going on?
No, this is purely quantitative. This is not a homeopathic approach. This is purely quantitative. X amount of deuterium means that X amount can get through those cell walls and stuff up those nanomotors, and you know, Y amount means it's going to do it less, right? And so it can't grow. In fact, it shrinks. So it's yeah, I can't give you an answer to the different approach, but I see this as just a purely. Sorry?
Like putting the deuterium at a lower level, it's like sense that the cancer then
Yeah.
going to resolve.
So in the.
I wonder if the homeopathic medicine might allow you to kind of exist on the water that we make, like the low deuterium water that we make in ourselves and not drink. So I know like some of the really radical fasting programs like try to get where they really reduce the food intake and the water.
Yeah, well, you can see why that works from one point of view, because then, so when you reduce your water intake, you're actually using more of your own metabolic water. Yeah. So this gentleman again, Boris, who I was referring to, he doesn't believe that you should drink X amount of water a day. He says drink when you're thirsty. Don't feel like you've got to drink 2 litres of water. If you're drinking 2 litres of water at 155 parts per million deuterium, you've got to process that, you've got to make sure it gets structured, you've got to make sure it gets charged, all of those things before it turns into metabolic water. But if your it's a bit of a catch-22 though, but because if you haven't got enough mitochondria making enough metabolic water, because it gets recycled in the cell, then you have to bring in stuff from the outside. And that's probably when your body says you're thirsty.
In our Fukushima, our rainwater has been experiencing elevated levels of radioactive iodine 129 right up down the coast.
I'll cover that just in a minute. I'll cover that.
Because when I found that out, which was just a year later, I had triple filters installed, which took out any radiation and all other things. So, because it also takes out metals and things too, I had to then add mineral supplements.
Sure.
But so with the deuterium in the drinking water, are you talking about filtered drinking water or straight out of the tap or rainwater? We just looked at what kind of...
All of the water that you guys are drinking, I don't care what your filter system is, will have 155 parts per million, right? If you distill water, you might lose 1 part per million. Right. Through distilling it, you might lose 1 part per million. So, yeah, Russell and I are keen to test some various waters, but and we'll.
What about the hydrogen gas that you generates. Is that?
If you let me come to that when I come to testing, it'll be good, and I'll come to the radiation thing as well. Here's just a graphic showing the effect of light water or depleted deuterium water on the level of survival of cancer patients, taken from this guy's results. So you can see, a significant difference in the number of weeks of survival. The book's quite technical, but another thing in the book talks about different cancers and how sensitive they are to different types of cancers and how sensitive they are to depleted deuterium water. Okay, so some are highly sensitive, some are averagely sensitive, and some have lesser sensitivity, and some are resistant. So there's only one in the resistant column, and it won't be a surprise if I tell you that's pancreatic cancer. In the lesser sensitivity, we have melanoma, glioblastoma, and gallbladder. Most of the cancers are in either average sensitivity and high sensitivity. As you can imagine, stomach cancer is quite high sensitivity because you're going to drink the water, it's going to get there pretty quick. So, so high sensitivity, uterus, cervix, tongue, larynx, thyroid, just lots. So that's just to say that it can help lots in the way that I'm talking about.
So every single cell in your body has mitochondrial,
Yeah. Every cell in our body. So it also affects your immune system. So how does it affect your immune system? Well, inflammation, they say, is a deuterium-related event. It's always present in cancers. It leads to immune dysregulation and the initiation of responses to non-harmful entities in the body that would otherwise be ignored. In other words, inflammation, when the body thinks there's something wrong with something, there's not. So anti-immune comes to mind. So the confused immune system then becomes worn out and incapable of mounting an effective response to harmful entities when they do arrive. So a common clinical finding in cancer is increased infections from fungus, bacteria, viruses and protozoa. So not to focus too much on cancer, but to go to say something like Lyme disease or Barmer forest or one of those things. So in the clinic I treat a lot of people with those things, and what I notice is when the immune system is low, they come back to the surface. So those of you that were here when I talked about the body electric, you may remember the little video that showed that when the oxygen left the cell, all the bad guys come out to play because they like oxygen. They don't like oxygen. And so this is another reason why we might have trouble with, we might have Lyme, or we might have those other things because we're high in deuterium. Yeah, does that make sense? Yeah. So if the immune, there's lots of things that, I'm just giving you an example, there's lots of things where we know that our immune system is the bobbing cork and it's just been pulled under the water. Yeah? And we know what that's like because suddenly we get a cold more easily. My Barmer forest comes up and the little red patches on my cheeks come up. So that's one of my clients. She has little red patches that come up when her immune system's down, and you can see that she's tired and she's just run herself down. So when we run ourselves into the ground, our immune system's low. So our immune system is much more resilient if we've got a level of deuterium that supports us, and we're not having to nail that as well as everything else. So how does deuterium help our immune system? Well, it lessens the availability of deuterium to dysregulate and turn off the system. It lessens the availability of deuterium that infectious pathogens need to grow. So it's not just cancer that grows, that likes that extra energy from the deuterium. It's pathogens like bacteria, viruses, fungus, protozoa. It mitigates the growth of existing infections while stopping the occurrence of new infections.
In that first one, when you're saying it turns off the immune system, why is that good? We always wanted to have the immune system built up.
Lessens the deuterium can turn off the immune system. Like I said in the previous slide, the deuterium can confuse the body so that the immune system's not so effective. So we're fighting with healthy cells, or we're not fighting where we should be fighting, or, you know, that sort of thing. So your body loses its ability to clear itself of deuterium as you age. Okay? So evidence indicates that aging is coupled with an accumulation of errors in DNA, we talked about that earlier, that arise due to strand breakages, DNA replication errors, or dysfunctional DNA repair mechanisms. Naturally occurring background radiation is a pervasive mutagen known to adversely affect DNA, as would Fukushima, obviously, or any excessive place we're getting more radiation than normal. So we can see this gentleman looks like he's a bit tired. I'm not sure it's deuterium, but we don't know what he did. So although mainstream researchers have overlooked the long-term effects of low deuterium, they're now starting to look at it. And the indications are that deuterium is coupled with, as we just said, DNA mutation and subsequent DNA damage, which affects the shape of molecules, enzymes, many of which involved in the synthesis and repair of our DNA. And as we said, the presence of deuterium in these enzymes slows DNA replication. It causes errors in transcription and hinders DNA repair. So does drinking depleted deuterium water allow us to live longer?
Is there a relationship between deuterium and radiation accumulation in the body? Like I'm just wondering if you drink low deuterium water, would that pull radiation out of the body? Does that have a cleansing effect?
Yeah, well, I've got a slide that shows about deuterium and radiation shortly. So we're just doing aging and DNA at the minute. So we've all heard of the Hunza people in Pakistan, have we? So they live up to 120 years old, maintaining an active lifestyle. Ladies, the women still have babies at 65. So some of them live up to 160 years. They've been known to live to 160 years. So consequently, they've done a lot of study about these people. You know, they want to know why they live for so long. So you won't be surprised to know, given our map before on depleted deuterium, that they live up high and drink ice melt water. Little hint. So they've worked out for some time that they reckon it's the water, whatever's in the water. It's not the food. They're not eating anything really different, other than the food is also growing in the water, right? So they've looked at the molecular structure, the colloidal status, the zeta potential, but until recently they didn't look at the deuterium level. Turns out that the water that the Hunza drink is 133 parts per million deuterium, which is in a really healthy range. And so that's from day dot, when baby's in the womb, to when the old guy dies at 160, right? So obviously it's not going to affect pregnant women drinking depleted deuterium water. It just makes stuff happen more slowly. Remember we said, I mean, what we've done with the deuterium levels as they now exist is kids grow more quickly, grow up more quickly, mature more quickly. Oh, I thought that was because, maybe it's because of the depleted deuterium. What if that was the case? Yeah? You notice kids grow more quickly, they're taller, they come to puberty more quickly. Yeah? So deuterium increases that, but it's okay when you're young because you can use it as like the energy. You know, your body's still got enough capability to not be doing stuff to the mitochondria.
I
So,
also noticed in the high school that the girls are growing up smarter, quicker, about 3 or 4 years ahead of the boys.
wasn't that always the case?
Thanks, that's a good answer. I'm happy now.
Can I say that one of the reasons why it's happening with children is the hormones in the beef and chickens because that.
Sure. Sure, and particularly in America where they're allowed to do 50% of recycled water can get put back into the normal water in a number of municipalities. So take your homeopathy approach to that and you don't want to go and live in that city, let me tell you.
And also, fluoride actually increases reduces the age at which girls go to have their periods after menarche. That was one of the first things they found when they tested these 2 cities in America about 50, 60 years ago or something. They found that the fluoridated cities, the girls like worked through menarche a whole year earlier, and they thought, that must be just some, nothing to do with the experiment. But no.
So
That probably actually increases more deuterium in the.
yeah. So in terms of what Corn's saying, Corn. So those of you who don't know Cornelius, he's a doctor, and he worked for Greenpeace for 7 years. So I'd like him just to tell you about his what he noticed about Antarctica, and because if you go to Antarctica, if you overstay.
Overwinter. Yeah.
If you overwinter in Antarctica, you're there for at least 6 months, right?
12 months.
12 months, and you're drinking
Just
glacial water, which is
ice cap water.
really reduced in deuterium.
At this point in the presentation, John asked me to mention a few points I had discussed with him about Antarctic ice cap water, which I then presented to the group. However, the audio was very poor, so I've chosen to go through that again here and present it again. My name is Cornelius van Dorp, and I'm a graduate of Auckland University School of Medicine in New Zealand in 1985, so I now have 34 years of medical practice under my belt. The first 7 years of my career, I worked for Greenpeace as a ship's doctor and Antarctic base camp doctor, and I overwintered at the Greenpeace base for the year of 1987. While there, I did a lot of research into cold climate medicine, and one of the papers I discovered in my reading was one that looked at the life expectancy of Antarctic overwinterers. And what I found very surprising about this paper was that it stated that those people who spent 1 year overwintering on the Antarctic ice cap on average lived 10 years longer than their peers. I thought about that, and I thought it might be due to the extra melatonin secretion during the 6 months of darkness in Antarctic, and that was in fact the subject of my own research over a couple of years, but I could not find any confirming evidence of this, so it remained a mystery to me. Why did Antarctic overwinterers live 10 years longer than their peers on average? My year on ice radically changed my life and my priorities in life, and on return to civilization, I continued working for Greenpeace for another 6 years, and as a ship's doctor, and did several voyages back to the Antarctic. And I also started on to an amazing journey of synchronicity, about which I wrote a series of 3 books. The first one being Crystal Mission, then Trail of the Hawk, and then A Search for the Feathered Serpent. This journey took me to some radically different places, and during which I stayed for a while in the New Age community of Sedona, Arizona. While staying there in 1990, as I reported in the Crystal Mission, I attended a talk by a gentleman by the name of Wes Bateman, who maintained that he'd been told that the Earth had been impacted by an asteroid or a meteor a few thousand years before Christ, which had introduced a massive amount of deuterium into the Earth's oceans and water supply. This was the reason, he said, for the stories in the Bible that detailed human aging dropping drastically around about the time of the Great Flood over a few generations, from reported ages of 900 plus prior to the flood down to less than 100 just a few generations after. At the time, I thought this was interesting and could possibly explain. It was a simple explanation that might be true, but and it was sort of confirmed by observing that populations who drank in high altitude areas that drank sort of glacial water lived to very old ages, for example, like the Hunza people. But it wasn't until I had dinner with John last month and heard about his new interest in deuterium depleted water and the amazing health-giving effects of drinking deuterium depleted water that I suddenly had a memory of that report I'd heard from Wes Bateman way back in 1990 in Sedona, Arizona, all those years ago, and I suddenly thought, oh my God, it might have been true. So I've done a little bit of a scientific search, and I can't actually find any evidence of Antarctic water being, in fact, low in deuterium levels, but we do have the evidence of the high glacial melt being 133 parts per million as opposed to 150 parts per million in the general Earth's water supply. So it still remains a question, but I thought it was very interesting, and so John asked me to present my thoughts on this, which I think are quite appropriate, and we may find out that it's all true.
I think we're discovering all these different things, and they're all coming together. And if we're lucky, we might end up sort of extending our age quite well.
Thanks, Con. I appreciate that.
How old are you, sir?
Getting younger the way things are going.
Yeah, so I wanted Corn to talk about those things simply because he and I had dinner one night and I was all excited because of the deuterium stuff, so I'm talking to him about this and he's saying, oh, that explains why these guys have 10 years longer in life, and I didn't know what he meant till he told me about overwintering in Antarctica, and then he went a bit more esoteric on me and talked about, something hitting Earth. And yeah, you do wonder when they say, in the Bible and stuff where people live for hundreds of years, and you don't know what to make of that. And sometimes simple excuses, simple reasons are the best. And I think the thing that I like about deuterium, it simplifies a lot of this stuff. And as we talk about some other ways to deplete deuterium in the body, it might fire up a few people who don't eat meat, for example, who have certain varieties of food that, like me, I love my coconut water. Not good.
Can I just add some information about coconuts and why I haven't been doing coconut water ever? Is because when I was on a yacht and scuba diving in the Marshall Islands and found out what happened in the Marshall Islands because of the American atomic testing there, they thought, because the Geiger counters had shown that when they put them back onto the Bikini Atoll, that there wasn't any radiation detectable with the Geiger counter, they put the people back. But what they didn't know was the coconut trees had actually absorbed radiation from atomic testing. All of them, when they came back, were eating coconut flesh and water, and they all got thyroid cancer and had to take them off again. So that's why, because no one tests coconut for radiation. And lots of coconuts come from sources still here, like the Philippines and those regions where radiation pollution.
So just how does deuterium depletion help the aging process? It lowers the amount of deuterium available to your DNA. It allows your cells as they're replicating and it allows your existing DNA to fold properly so that you get the right places to make good cells. Stops the high rate of mutation in cancer cells and therefore increases the effectiveness of drugs. It allows cells to stop replicating and mature like normal cells so that they can die a natural death. Oops. So here, I've got a few slides now that are about some studies that have... So guess what? It's good for the day after. You don't get such a hangover. So here's a study that was done about the human reaction after ingesting alcohol and drinking light water afterwards. Okay, so there's there's two parts to this study. One they tested the memory, like how good your memory was when you had the light water compared to when you had the normal water after you were drunk, right? And your memory was better on the light water. And then they tested subjects on auto racer simulators to see how their reactions were when they'd had alcohol compared to regular water and light water. And you can see they got up to over 40% more crashes compared to what's the other one, about 20. So twice as much. So depleted deuterium water helps. If you're going to, I don't think they're going to lower the breath test though. If you put up your hand and say, "Look, I'm on depleted deuterium water. I'm 50% better driver than when I'm not." So here's some protection from environmental hazards. So they looked at cadmium ingestion and detoxification with control water and with deuterium. So they had a concentration of cadmium in rat liver after intoxication, and then the one on the right with the graph is the life expectancy of flatworms after manganese intoxication. So what they're looking at was heavy metals, and is there any advantage on having depleted deuterium water if you've ingested heavy metals? And again, they did it on rats and flatworms, but the answer was a distinct yes. Radiation. So there's a couple of people who wanted to know about radiation. So here's a study that was a survival test on animals after sublethal doses of radiation. So the control is the black line and the pink line is the test, and the lower lines are the animals treated with the usual water. So you can see so that black sort of curved line is if you didn't have any radiation, basically. The bottom two lines, one's just trying to approximate the other really, but they're what happens if you just had the normal water with the doses of radiation, and the pink line is if you had the light or the depleted deuterium water with. So that's interesting, isn't it? So it helps heavy metals, helps radiation. And remember, even forgetting about Fukushima or Bikini Atoll or any of those things, there's a background level of radiation that we live with, and arguably people would say at the moment it's higher than it's ever been because our what do we call it? What protects the Earth?
Atmosphere, stratosphere,
is tinier than it's been for a while because of where we are in the
lack of sunspots.
Lack of sunspots.
All our water and atmosphere comes from the sunspots.
Between 2020 and 2028, the grand solar minimum will be at its peak. So you can expect crop losses, crop failures, extremes of environmental So
what I'm saying is the natural result of that is more radiation, and we can handle it better on light water.
End of civilization.
Sorry?
The end of the civilization.
End of the civilization.
Oh, it is.
So I'm just trying to help you live long enough to see it, that's all.
You live well.
So we're going to get to the pointy end now. So we've talked about depleted deuterium, what it does to us, how it, deuterium, excess levels of deuterium and what that does for us, depleted levels and how that can help us. But the first thing I'd like to know is, well, what is my level of deuterium? You know, me, what's my level? So I searched all over Australia, I rang many labs, and no one will measure my deuterium level. So I have to go to Europe or I have to go to the States to get my deuterium level measured. So you won't believe how much time I've spent finding the three things in this slide, right? What are the three main methods of measuring deuterium? Mass spectrometry, gravimetry, and you can imagine it's pretty extreme gravimetry when you've got something as small as a deuterium atom. You need a few of them, like 3 grams in a litre of water. So I'm going to measure this litre of water, measure this other one and go, oh, this has got more deuterium, but it's not going to be a really accurate measurement if I've got 3 grams per litre. What's a litre of water? A kilogram. So in 1,000 grams, I'm going to have, anyway.
Very small.
So I'm still following these up further in terms of instruments, but I've been looking to see if we could get an instrument in Australia, or if I could work with a laboratory that was prepared to work with me, and I'll get the word out and all that sort of stuff. And so far, the cheapest device that I've found that will measure deuterium in food, in water, and in our breath, and in our saliva is $120,000 US. So that's why they don't measure. You know, the food producers don't have that ability. And so if there's nowhere in Australia that does it, what food producer is ever going to put their
For deuterium, that may be the case, but for radioactive contamination, my friend.
radioactive chemistry? Yeah.
He does it, and he discovered that he lists on his site Dutch cookies with cinnamon from India were radioactive, and the cinnamon had become contaminated. His coconut scrubbing brush was radioactive. Metal that one of his friends was using to do some welding was radioactive. There were so many things, because also when you realise it was radioactive steel from 9/11 was shipped immediately to China. That radioactive steel is in all sorts of things.
Well, you have to share with the group his website and his methods and stuff like that. I'm sure they'd be interested, you know. So they're the three main ways of measuring deuterium. So how do we deplete deuterium? Well, we need to sweat more, exercise more. So when you sweat, we all know when we sweat we release more toxins. It's easy for the body to get rid of toxins. So one of those things is deuterium. When we, you know, because the body's depleting deuterium all the time, when we breathe out or when we pee, we're getting rid of deuterium. When we cry, we're getting rid of deuterium. Okay? When we eat food that's depleted in deuterium, we're essentially getting rid of deuterium by not eating other stuff, right? When we drink water that's depleted in deuterium, over time, the water in our body will be replaced by a depleted level of deuterium water. But remember, it's not enough just to drink depleted deuterium water, because the other slide earlier said, where do we get our water from? The food we eat as well. Okay? So, and you know, some of the people that I have drinking depleted deuterium water of different concentrations go, oh yeah, and I had a this and I had a that and I had a whatever, you know, I had a coconut water, or I had a chai tea, or I had a cup of tea or whatever. Well, straight away they're adding rather to the deuterium level. So maybe you need to take a more depleted level of the water that you're drinking to account for that. In the protocol, for example, he says say you have a bad meal, you go to a restaurant with a friend and you blow all the things that you should do. He says, come home and put 30 mils in a little thing of the 25 and just knock that down, just to cancel a meal, as it were. So it's just common sense stuff. It's not. So switching to a ketogenic diet, low in carbs with moderate amounts of high quality protein and high in fat, naturally reduces the amount of deuterium-rich water we consume. Okay, so high fat depletes deuterium. So that can be avocado, that can be fat in nuts, but it can also be, this Boris. Boris is a Hungarian. I guess Hungarians love their meat. So Boris, he likes upsetting people because he's one of the world's experts on depleted deuterium. So he likes upsetting people. And in this guy's book, by the way, so vegetarians have got the least benefit from the deuterium water on cancer. So when he's done his cancer patients, so he tests them to see which effects. So vegetarians are the ones that have benefited the least from doing the protocols on cancer. So,
because they're already depleted from here? Yeah.
Well, maybe because they're already depleted. I don't know. See, it depends what they eat. Because if you eat a lot of potato, it's a root vegetable. It's got plenty of deuterium in it. It doesn't see much sunlight. It hasn't got any chlorophyll doing the depletion. If you eat a lot of green vegetables and stuff, you eat a lot of fruit. A lot of fruit's got a lot of deuterium.
Well, sprouts. That's like probably the most healing diet is sprouts.
Sprouts is good. Fruit. See, the thing about fruit is it's high in sugar, hence high in deuterium, even though it's above the ground and on a tree. But we can eat it all the year round. In the days in older times, we would just have that which was in season in our part of the world, right?
Yeah.
And we ate it in the proportion. We didn't have an orange juice that consisted of 10 oranges. We had an orange, or maybe 2 if we're a bit hungry, or 3 if we'd played a game of football. I don't, I'm kidding. I just used to love the oranges at half time when I played footy. So Boris upsets people by saying he has grass-fed grass-fed animals, and he eats the meat, but it's really the fat. So he likes like marbled beef from grass-fed animals. So for those that still eat meat, there you go. That'll help you deplete deuterium. I'm not trying to change it from being a vegetarian at all. I'm just reporting what Gabor said about his findings with cancer.
I think a lot about meat in Australia is grass-fed, as opposed to
I think no, I don't. Yeah, no. A lot of it's
grass finished or grass grain. Like one of the guys I know that sells supposedly grass-fed beef. He actually spends the last 2 weeks feeding it grain, which completely ruins everything.
very well said. My brother works in that industry, and he and I are on very different pages about a lot of things. But guess what? He doesn't eat any grain-fed beef, and he doesn't eat any pork or stuff from those people that grow, have pigs in pens and all that sort of stuff. He eats organic anything and all of that sort of stuff. So he'll sell all the other stuff, which I have an issue with. No. But himself, he knows what it's good to eat, So really all I want to say is that fat is something that depletes deuterium. And a ketogenic diet, you have to... The thing that I wanted to be able to tell you and I couldn't tell you is there used to be a list on this American company's site that Boris is one of the directors of, about what they call a depleted deuterium ketogenic diet. So it says which foods are depleted in deuterium. So you can just change that diet around a little bit. But now they want you to go through a consultative process that costs X amount of dollars before they'll give you that. They took it down from the website.
John, question. When you're talking about fat,
I can't answer all the questions now rather than at the end because it would be unfair to the other people. So we can use a breathing mask to deplete deuterium. So exhaled breath contains increased amounts of CO2, and a breathing mask forces us to increase those amounts. That raises the CO2 level in the hemoglobin. The hemoglobin breaks the CO2, releasing a single oxygen. Using a breathing mask, more single oxygens released than without it, and that binds with the hydrogen, but it has a preference to bind with deuterium. So with that preference, of course, by using a breathing, by using a rebreather, or you could just use a paper bag as long as you filled it up with a bit of air every so often, right? But the only downside of rebreathing is what? Increases your acidity level, right? Because you're going to have more carbon dioxide, so you're going to be more acidic. So I'd like to think everyone in the room's aware of their acidity level. But no, it's important that you become aware of it because, as Jerry says, it's pointed to your voltage, your acidity levels. So what should it be? If you follow Jerry, he says that the best thing to measure is your saliva, not your urine. Your urine is what you get rid of, the saliva is what you got. You do it first thing in the morning before you've eaten or drunk anything, and you use some pH paper that goes up at least 0.2 increments, not the stuff that goes up in 0.5, right? And if you're 6.6 or above, Jerry would say it's okay, because he believes you add 0.8 to your salivary pH to get your cellular pH. Right? So other people say different things. I believe what he says. The other people who say different things, largely they're saying it for your benefit. So if someone's got cancer and their pH is probably 5.8 or something like that, you want them to get it up above 6.6 because you want them to be even more alkaline. So 6.6 is just a minimum for a healthy person. Above that, even better. Above that, more alkaline. But there's a difference between pH and alkalinity, and if you want to know how that is, this talk's not about explaining that. You'll find it on the website H2 4U. Some cards over there. That's a website of mine, and it's got some simple videos that explain about alkalinity and pH. And even though pH is often seen to be a measure of alkalinity, it's not. You can buy alkaline water from the supermarket that's got a pH of 9. You can add 2 drops of apple cider vinegar to it and measure the pH again, and it'll be way down. But if you add that to, say, some water that's had some sodium bicarb added, and its pH might be less than that 9, it might be like 8. You can probably add this much apple cider vinegar and it won't move, because alkalinity is about buffering. It's not about pH, is about potential hydrogen. So if you've got people who are sick, just test their alkalinity. When you're in the red, when you've got a positive voltage in a cell, the cell's not happy. So I wouldn't recommend a rebreathing mask for people who are already acidic. But a rebreathing mask is a cheap way to do it. One of the things that we're going to find is depleted deuterium water is expensive, and I'll explain why. So how do we make depleted deuterium water? Well, as I said, when you distill water, it can lower it only by 1 or 2 parts per million, which is pretty expensive because you're going to boil it all up, it all condenses again, and you've only lost 1 to 2. So if water's already at 155, maybe you're down to 153 or 154. So there's a video or 2 on YouTube that says you can do it by freezing it, because remember we said when you freeze it, the deuterium ice falls to the bottom and bloody blah, and it freezes. It freezes before water freezes. So if you sort of watch it, you can sort of go, okay, as it's starting to freeze, that'll be deuterium, right? So then you tip off all the ice and keep the deuterium, and you do that 4 or 5 times, you know, and you might get 5 to 8 parts per million. But it's a tedious process. I'm using a lot of freezer space, and it's, you know, I've read in some forums where people go, oh, you get 5 to 8 parts per million each time you freeze it. Not true. Not true. So fractional distillation is the best way to produce deuterium depleted water on a large scale.
What's that?
Fractional distillation is because the water they have different boiling points. You know, you can shift this one off at this boiling point, but it's not as simple as that because they're so close. So what you end up doing is using a device something like that. So this is a device that's used for making depleted deuterium water. It uses low temperature vacuum rectification, evaporation, and then rectifies the columns. What does all that mean? It just means it runs through this thing a number of times, the water's going to vapour and coming back, and it's taking off the heavy water, the deuterium. There's a plant where they make deuterium water. That's in Europe. That's only part of the plant. They wouldn't give us a picture of the whole shebang. So the sad thing about deuterium depleted water is that there's a patent out on how to make it, and even the Yanks haven't been able to. The Yanks have to import the water from Europe, right? They haven't been able to make their own depleted deuterium water in America because of this patent. So, and if you see in that little table on the right-hand side, just getting deuterium water to 100 or 40, you use a lot of water and a lot of electricity. See that? So for 1 litre of 40 parts per million, and remember, this is 25 parts per million, so 2 of those bottles is 25. This is just for 40 parts per million. You use 25 litres of normal water and you use 6.5 kilowatts of power. So it is an expensive process. So one of those bottles, $20 by the time I get it from Europe and get it here and sell it, it's $20. So I can probably get it at about half that price if I'm willing to buy $100,000 worth at a time. So, sorry?
Why don't we just still waste water?
Well, largely where they make it in Europe, they start with glacial water so they don't have to use so much energy in water. Okay, but yeah, well, you know, to set up somewhere in the Antarctic to do that, I'd imagine would cost quite a bit of money. So where the Hunza people drink it high up, and it's still 133. You know, even if you've got a, you know, there's people that, what's his name? There's a guy that has a not Jim Humble. There's a guy that says he has a machine that does it in the States, and he maintains it depletes the deuterium out of water, but he won't allow the water to be tested. So people rave about it and say it's all good, and everyone on the forum says, yeah, but can you test it? So it costs $75 US to get it tested if you live in the States. So there's another brand of water that's got a lot of press recently, and they purport to be depleted in deuterium. But they don't tell you what the deuterium level is, you know. I could sell you distilled water and say it's depleted in deuterium, right? Because it is, 1 or 2 points. But if you've got cancer and you want to follow Garbor's method, you know, you need to get something that's really quite depleted. So I'm being a guinea pig at the moment, so I've been drinking 125 parts per million depleted deuterium water as the water that I drink. I haven't been perfect. I've had the odd drink. I don't drink, but I don't not drink, if you know what I mean. So I have an occasional red wine or an occasional beer in a social situation. And sometimes if I'm not away from home, I'll come back and have 25 mils of 25 parts per million deuterium. And I've ponied up for the $500 Australian that it'll cost me to have my deuterium levels measured. So I sent that off after 3 weeks of doing 125 parts per million. So I will be able to let you know what effect that's had, if any. But I'd suggest it's had an effect. I feel better for doing it. So I simply take 150 mils of that and mix it with 600 mils of, in my case, pure water, not spring water, not tap water, not distilled water, but what I call pure water. So my water comes from an evaporative water machine, so it pulls the water out of the atmosphere, and then it goes through a UV light to get rid of bacteria. Then it goes through two pre-filters and 2 post-filters to get rid of anything that was in the atmosphere. Then it goes through another UV light, and then I get the water. So that's my solution that I use to get my water. You still have to put it through your filters, in other words, but you can pull it out. At least when you pull it out of the atmosphere, you're not getting fluid. You're not getting any of the crap. So I just thought I'd put this up. This is the protocol that Gabor gives for an aggressive cancer and deuterium water. So you notice he starts pretty low. He still starts at 87.5. So I'll let you guys know when I get my results back from the States. Probably another 3. I got an email yesterday. I sent the samples back 2 weeks ago, and I get an email yesterday saying, "Oh yes, we've got your sample. Another 3 weeks, we'll send you your results." So and it costs, as I said, around 375 plus freight plus whatever US dollars for me to do that. So if you've got an aggressive cancer, you have got a high level of deuterium in your body. How do I know that? One of the other things that Boris's organisation does, they're the ones that I sent my test off to. They're very big on all this stuff, but they're all very big on making money too, and you can't blame them. That's what their focus is, obviously. They have a way of processing an MRI to show the levels of deuterium in the body and where it is. And again, there's a large amount of money for one of those tests, and you have to. And I don't know that you can send them an MRI and have them process it, or whether you have to go there and have an MRI in their premises and have it processed there. But in one of the YouTubes that I've watched, he explains why it works, and what they've been able to show is that where there is cancer in the body, and there are high levels of deuterium in those places. So it probably explains why some cancers are super sensitive to depleting deuterium, because they will be areas of the body where water gets to easily when we drink it, like the stomach, or sort of down through the digestive tract, liver, kidney, bladder, all of those places. So you can see it'd take quite a few bottles of water to run that protocol. So 2 weeks at 87.5, So if you're adding water that's 150, 155 to water that's 25, you just, I've got it in a little spreadsheet, I can tell you how many, I can tell you the relationship. So my relationship to get 125 parts per million from 25 parts per million is to mix 150 mils with 600 mils, giving me 750 mils of water at. So that works out at about 8 odd, nearly 9 bottles for a fortnight, so $190 a week. So one of the other things I meant to talk about on the way through, and I'll talk about it now, is I'll get Irene to give us her experience. I want to prefix this by saying depleted deuterium also helps greatly with diabetics, with diabetes. I was going to put some slides in, I didn't have time.
Okay. Well, about a month ago, I went for random blood tests and they diagnosed me with diabetes. There's a slow sugar uptake test, gave me 12 after 1 hour of drinking the glucose and 9 after 2 hours. So they put me as diabetic. And they said, there's no cure, you just have to deal with it through food. And I thought, I don't believe in that. So I started asking. And Russell came up with the answer, deuterium. So I Googled it, and Google says deuterium is the precursor to diabetic 1. And I thought, I'm on the mark, because I knew I was eating dried fruit in the buckets because I was making them myself. And because of that, I picked on my deuterium, and I knew that was the cause because the timing was just perfect. And so I started, and the next thing I found was keto diet is reducing on your deuterium. So I went on that, and then John suggested, why don't you try deuterium water, which I did. And the concentration he gave was 300 mils to 1,200 mils. That brings it to 1,500 per day. So I did that. And I was taking my blood tests every day to get a data so I could compare, know how it feels in the body for changes, etc. What happened was I noticed it wasn't coming down. Even with my diet, it was staying on 7, sometimes 8, and it wasn't dropping to under 6, which was the optimum. I approached John and he said, maybe we need to increase the volumes. So we went from 500, a bottle of that, to a bottle of water, because water has deuterium. So because of the quantity I was drinking more deuterium than I would normally drink. And that 500 doesn't make up for the quantity I was drinking. So we reduced the quantity to a liter, 500 and 500. And I noticed that my blood sugar was dropping down every day, and it went to under 6 in 1 month. That's awesome for what the doctor says, there's no cure. It's working with the keto diet and the deuterium water. But it's only 1 month, so I can't possibly say that's definitely the cure, but it certainly did help. Thank you.
Thanks, Russell. It's 1 month and it's a sample size of 1, but also you had tried a number of things. Like, it wasn't like you just stopped eating the dried fruit and then you went on the deuterium. So here's another thing for healthy people. So this is sort of what I would suggest for a healthy person that wanted. So here's the thing, do you have to be on this thing forever? Well, only if you do what you've always done. Do you know what I mean? Like, so if you get your deuterium level down to a level that your body can handle a level of deuterium. It has all your life. It's just as you've got older, it's got worse, or as you've eaten whatever you're eating, it's got worse, or as you've lived in a certain environment, it's got worse, right? So I just see the water, and this is how Boris talks about it. It's just a shortcut way to help you get to where you want to get more quickly, right? It's not the solution. The solution is to eat a proper diet, get out in the sun, sweat, breathe, blah, 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 but get your deuterium down to a level where your body can actually physically cope, right? And it would be great for me if I had a testing regime where I could test that. So you come in, I test you, you go on this process here that I'm recommending, which is either somewhere between 6 and 9 weeks, and you do 125 and then you go down to 105. Or maybe you could do what Irene did and go a little bit lower, 1 to 1, which would be what? 25, then 55 is 80. 180 divided by 2 is 90. So she went on a 90, she actually went on a 90 parts per million diet by doing 1 and 1. Does that make sense? So you could, you could change the 105 to 90, or you could put another step in there. But you should also go back up in the same, you just don't stop, right? You just go back up in a slow way as well. So you're getting your body a chance to adjust. So that's for healthy people, or I just wanted to do that by way of example. So you could work out, I haven't done the math, if I was smart I would have said, and if you get this many bottles you'll be doing that, but I can tell you 2 weeks at 125 is 8.1 bottles, but I can't tell you what the one in the middle is. I'd have to get the spreadsheet out.
Is there any downside to drinking 1.5 litres of that a day?
Only that he doesn't. Only that the cancer guy doesn't recommend it, and Boris doesn't. They all recommend that you bring it down and take it up. So I haven't seen any negative effects from doing it. Like I knock down, when I'm naughty, I knock down 30 mils of the straight stuff, so it hasn't really affected me. I can't. I'll take that question on notice, and I'll next time. I have talked to some of the directors.
Maybe it's only if you've got serious disease that can sort of break it up, there's a Herxheimer reaction or something.
Yeah.
Like too rapid a detox sort of thing.
But it's, they say that when you're on the protocol, you should spread it out. So even if you were going to take some of that straight, why wouldn't you just, it's pretty easy to do 1 to 1, so why not just do 1 to 1 and spread it out over the day? Corn, you just want to have a swig. That's really the truth, isn't it?
That's what I've been doing, yeah.
So just in summary, what happens here? We can improve cellular respiration and cell regeneration. So that sounds pretty good, especially if you're getting older. We talked about reduction of blood sugar with type 2 and even type 1 diabetes. Increase our human energy resources. What does that mean? Let those little mitochondria run like they should. Prevent hangover after intoxication. So it doesn't apply to anyone in the room, does it really? No. Excellent help for chronic fatigue. I haven't really talked about that, but I did see some studies. It just wasn't a nice pretty graph that I could show you in a slide. Enhancement of our immunity and cancer prevention. So I was talking to these guys before, and one of the things about cancer is that it can be in your body up to 5 years before it gets to a size enough that it's recognisable by the most common methods we use to say that it's there. There are 3 types of cancer that a 15-year-old discovered away with some paper. Just think of litmus paper, but it's not litmus paper. So this 15-year-old, and it's a TED talk that you can get, discovered a way for pancreatic, lung, and some other form of cancer, and you can find it really early. But the 5-year thing is why, when they put you on chemo, they won't say that you're recovered, or what's the word? You're in remission. they won't say you're fully in remission until after 5 years, because then they figure it hasn't grown enough for them to be able to measure it. So, reduces the negative impact of harmful substances, toxins received from food in the air. So we saw a couple of graphs where they've done some studies. Improvement of skin and hair condition. So, yeah, better way to look after your skin. So we'll see. You'll be able to watch me. I'll be on it for a while, I reckon. Improvements of organism reproduction functions. There you go. So we did say that the Hunza women were having children at 65, didn't we? So, and they're only on 133 parts per million, but they've been on it all their life. Compensation of negative factors for air flight. So radiation, jet lag, acclimatisation and stress. So no surprise to see that people that travel a lot have done those studies. So we do studies that we're interested in. So this is for me, this is something I want to put out there as a proposed goal and aim, is that that I create a clinic, or a group of us create a clinic where we can offer drug-free treatment, rehabilitation and anti-aging therapy with non-invasive methods. So wouldn't be just depleted deuterium water, but it would involve, you know, things like these machines over here, the hydrogen machines. It would involve making sure people's pH were in a good place, or their alkalinity really. Would make sure people's electrical systems were turned on and those sorts of things. So it would need us to find a way to test for deuterium in water, food and tissue. So the test they use to find out the deuterium in your tissues is the breath test. They say the out-breath is a measure. The deuterium in your out-breath is a measure of the deuterium that's been remediated from your cells. So when I did my thing to send back from the States, they sent me this like metal tube that you had to put in the freezer for 3 hours, and then this breathing tube that you put inside the metal tube, and then you had to breathe into this tube for a period of time, and the coldness of this metal tube condenses the breath into a liquid, and then you take both ends off and put a thing in both ends, a stopper in both ends, and you send that off. So that was how they tested the tissues from your breath. And if you didn't send back the metal tube, they hit your credit card for another $50 US. So, and as part of this proposed goals and aims would be the collection of information about the effects of deuterium depletion on health and animal health and wellbeing. So I haven't talked much about animal health, so I might just take a little minute to say that they've got a product in Hungary that is in a little bottle like this, and it's, I can't say its name, some Hungarian word that starts with A, right? And it's essentially been approved as a pharmaceutical for dogs and cats that have cancer, you know? It's just 40 parts per million depleted deuterium water, that's all it is. In a little bottle like this. And they give it to the dogs and the cats, and so there's a...
Not diluted.
Sorry? Not diluted, no. So that's an go, not diluted. But you're not a dog or a cat. He doesn't, yeah.
Yeah, well,
So there we go. So all those people that had questions, now feel free. So the hydrogen machine, don't they offset deuterium? He thought they would have. So let me take the opportunity to say there's two machines here. One's a Brown's gas machine, which is the big one that produces lots of Brown's gas. So it's a $10,000 machine that's made in cans. And so it produces oxygen and hydrogen from electrolysis in one, and it has an electrolyte to enable that process sodium hydroxide to enable that process to proceed. But it puts them all in one container. So the gas is in one container, and when you put those gases in one container, they call it Brown's gas. And arguably, there's a more esoteric part, or there's some other constituents of that gas that are not oxygen and hydrogen, that may be monatomics, or maybe even another thing that we don't measure, because Brown's gas has certain properties, and there's not really much, if any, research on Brown's gas, but there's lots of testimonial type stuff of people that have breathed Brown's gas. The other machine is a similar machine, but it has two outlets, one for the oxygen and one for the hydrogen. You can join those back up, and given that the gas can't come out anywhere else, I suppose it's going to produce the same as the Brown's gas machine. But I generally use more for just the molecular hydrogen component, because there is a lot of research on molecular hydrogen alone, and that research is on the website. It's on the card, the H24U website. So a lot of people want to see science. There's a lot of science to show how that helps in lots of different ways, right? And now and if people want to try those machines after the talk, they're welcome. Russell and I will help you get on and try them. So the one thing I want to say though is the whole purpose of these machines is they're really only of use if you do them regularly. So if you have 30 minutes of hydrogen gas from this machine, you'll be saturated, your body will be saturated, and 1 hour later it'll all be gone, because it's the smallest molecule known to man and you can't sort of trap it. It'll go, the only thing that keeps it in, they have some hydrogen products that sell in aluminium pouches, because they reckon that traps it for a little period of time. I would love to measure the hydrogen in those pouches after a period of time just to see if what they say is true, but I refuse to drink anything out of aluminium pouches anyway. So the gas that comes out of these, I haven't tested the gas. The $120,000 machine that'll test deuterium, it'll test the gas. We don't have one, so I have to believe what the manufacturers of both these machines have said. Well, I can't go on this guy, I haven't talked to him, but I've also got a Brown's gas machine back in the clinic, and I know what has said, no, not Jack, yeah, the guy in the States, anyway, has said. And he said he's had it tested, and so both the machines should have no deuterium in the gas output.
Okay, that's good, but the question is, does it displace deuterium in the body? I guess that's what I was wondering. It just seemed to me if you absorbed a lot of the pure hydrogen for a period of time, it would displace the deuterium.
Well, it's not so much displacement, it's like depletion. If you're breathing air that's got the regular amount of deuterium in it, which we all are in the room, if you're suddenly breathing this for an hour, you're breathing something else that's got less deuterium. It's a little bit like if you normally drink water that's got 155 parts per million, then you start drinking something that's depleted. It's not so much that that will replace the water in your body, but that's not really it, because the water in your body gets turned into metabolic water regardless. It's that your body doesn't have so much deuterium that it has to deplete. So that's how these machines work, and there's adequate testimony for both machines that will show that for people with cancer, if they sort of sleep with it on or use it for long periods of time, then effectively they're depleting deuterium, because they're breathing deuterium, something without deuterium, whereas before they would have just been breathing the normal atmosphere. Does that make sense?
And you're breathing air with it as well.
So you will have some deuterium in the air with, yeah.
It's not just pure Brown's gas to breathe.
Same with that. If you've got a cannula on, yes, you're breathing molecular hydrogen, but you are still breathing some air. So it's just depleted. It's not completely gone. Yeah.
What's the volume of that put out? As in the amount of hydrogen per hour?
It's on a big number on the front of the machine.
Okay, so you can crank it up to what?
No, that's it. It just runs at one speed.
The other one has an adjustment.
The other one you can crank up because
So I'm not sure what the figures are.
this one's 260 millilitres per minute. I guess I'm just curious that you can't close your doors and windows when you let it run. You fill the room. Hydrogen goes that way. Yeah, sure. So as long as you've got some ventilation, yeah. Look, clearly you don't want an open flame near these machines, and clearly you don't want to go over the 4% hydrogen air mixture thing. But basically hydrogen just leaves the area. I mean, I run that, I've gone to sleep, run it in the bedroom, you know, but I don't smoke or there's no source of flame. But yeah, it's a point, and it's a point that's made to everyone that buys one of those.
It's a fairly high level of hydrogen you're going to explode.
Oh, it's only 4.
So I don't think you're going to get that level happening with the machine. Unless you put it in unless you put it in a small enclosed space, and you might be able to pump that full and then go.
Other questions? I don't think. What Boris has talked about in terms of oils is really coconut oil was his oil of choice because it takes heat more. In terms of he didn't talk about the deuterium. I don't know the deuterium level of olive oil. I just know that you shouldn't use it in cooking where you're adding heat because it. But in
the Mediterranean diet that keeps people from having heart attacks, they put it on their salads, which is what we do.
Mm-hmm.
And we use macadamia nut oil. And just on the radio yesterday, they said canola oil, extra virgin olive oil, all of these things extend your life. And they said.
Well, I suggest you go to and look up stuff about canola oil because there's definitely canola oil is definitely bad. So yeah, so this is about the deuterium level, so I don't want to. Yeah. Patrick Flanagan was onto the hydrogen thing before other people, so he has another product, which is the little. No, there's crystal water, and then he's got the hydrolyte or omega. Yeah, but they're different. The crystal water is different than the mega hydrate. So the mega hydrate's the one that's meant to get the hydrogen. So it's the equivalent of doing like some hydrogen tablets. So I don't know about the crystal water.
So what do the hydrogen tablets do?
Hydrogen tablets. So you put a hydrogen tablet in a bottle of water, and it releases hydrogen that bubbles through the water. The water. It puts molecular hydrogen in the water, so there's no reason you couldn't bubble it through your depleted deuterium water, right? It's just really the cheapest way of getting hydrogen gas through the tablet. So, but they basically all lie about what percentage of hydrogen you get. So the most parts per million the most parts per million of hydrogen that you can get at atmospheric pressure from a tablet or from trying to dissolve hydrogen. So both of these machines will bubble it through water, and later on I've bought a testing thing, and we're going to see how much molecular hydrogen is in that water that's been bubbled through. Okay, so but the most is 1.6 parts per million. That's possible. I've done measurements on these tablets and the other tablets in a grey black. Yeah, and they're both about 1.91.
What I was taught to do is when you drop the tablet in, you breathe the hydrogen as well. And that, I think you get a huge benefit from the breathing of it. And then when you drink the water, that goes into your gut and it starts the hydrogen production system back up again because a damaged gut biome is so badly damaged that we're not producing the 40 litres a day it's supposed to produce.
Well, yeah.
It's producing an enormous amount of hydrogen from in your gut, and that's what feeds the mitochondrial motors.
Yeah, I don't know about the number, but...
No, I don't know the number either, but what I found recently is I breathed before I got my machine, I breathed the tablet, the hydrogen coming off the tablets, and then I drink the water, And then I did a test where I didn't do it for a few days, and I actually found that I was holding really well, just probably from just re-getting the gut.
Well, there'll be two reasons though. The other thing with the tablets, they also produce magnesium hydroxide, which in the body breaks down into ionic magnesium, which most of us are short in.
Yeah.
So most of us don't have enough magnesium, particularly, I don't know if you've ever over-exercised. You know, your muscles will go, I need a bit of magnesium, so get into the bath with the magnesium crystals or run some of that gel on your legs or whatever, or have a hydrogen tablet.
In my study on the depleted deuterium and the whole hydrogen thing, really, what I found is the ketogenic diet. I didn't know that the ketogenic diet, what it was and why it worked. But when I looked at the depleted deuterium, I realised that all the things that they say you should eat and shouldn't eat were all the things that were on the ketogenic diet. Right? Now, one of the reasons that is because plants have this mechanism within them to protect themselves from the deuterium. And what they do is they shunt it all into all the starches and all those sort of things, and into these sugars. That's why eating all the fruit that Irene found out was an issue. And so that sort of makes a lot of sense why the green, grassy things, the fruit, the leafy veggies, they're putting it elsewhere. They're going to put it into the seed and things like that, so it'll store it in other things. So that's why the fruits and all of those sugary things and all the carbohydrates are out of the ketogenic diet or out of the depleted deuterium.
Yeah, if I can get a full list of foods and their deuterium levels, I will post them up on the website. I just haven't been able to get something that was scientifically proven for me to be satisfactory.
Pumping the hydroxy gas, which is the Brown's gas, into your water and then watering your plants, somehow that seems to be allowing the plants to grow a lot better and possibly having depleted deuterium, because that's really starting to get a bit of momentum.
So you probably need the $10,000 machine to be able to get enough water in that manner.
Yeah, well, that really pumps a lot into the water. I don't know. These are all things that I'm going to start.
Yeah, Russell and I got a heap of testing that we would like to do if we had the ability to test different waters and things, because we're both very interested in, yes, there's no deuterium in the gas, but what happens when you run the gas through the water? You know, does that mean the water's then a bit more depleted or a bit less depleted? Well, you don't know to measure it. We could muscle test it, perchance, but I've looked at lots of waters all over the world that are tested, and waters that people swear about as being great waters, and they still have high levels of deuterium. They've got all these other things that are good for you, and they don't have the things that are bad for you, and they taste good, but it's, you know, deuterium is just a whole different kettle of fish. And in terms of the ketogenic diet, there's 4 directors of this Signature Health or DD centres, which are the transition name for this company in the States. It's the major company in this area. And one of the other directors, he was curing animals with cancer with a ketogenic diet, right? Having great success. They had this test where they did 100 animals, and I forget how many, quite a significant number, you know, got well. Some of them still died. Some of them, the cancer died so quickly that the kidneys and livers couldn't handle it, so the animals still died. Anyway, he meets up with Boris, and Boris tells him just what you said. Boris says, you know, I hate to you know, prick your balloon, but it's really the depleted deuterium in your ketogenic diet that's making this work. He must have believed him, because he's now come on board and he's one of the 4 directors of the company. So I think it just goes to that the thing that I really like about it, and I'll finish with this, is that it's simple. It's really simple, you know. We really don't like deuterium. If we've got less deuterium, our body works better, and we're not looking for, so many of the solutions for health are so complex. You're going to do an amount of rebreathing with that, because you're going to breathe this.
I intuitively just want to keep it on. I mean, that's how it's wanting to wear it. I don't know why, but I guess maybe that's why.
The only reason you'll want to take it off is when it gets really hot. Because unfortunately, I had a young man come to me with a number of cancers. He was in his early 40s. He'd been working on the Whitsundays for several years, and his job was to sand the decks on all of the buildings in the different, common places and balconies and all that. And generally in 12 months, he'd be back at the start again, like it'd take him 12 months to go around the island and do it. And I don't know whether you realise, but a lot of the things they use on those decks are highly toxic. They have highly toxic chemicals in them. And he never wore a mask. And had cancer of the lungs first. So, all because I asked him why he didn't wear a mask. He said, it just got too hot up there, out in the sun, wearing a mask. He died at age 46.
If it's walls or out of the heat, yeah, that's